From the forewing and the hind wing to the thorax and the circus. Good morning, good afternoon, and chirp chirp. I'm Jason Burns.
And I'm Danny Nucci, and this is the What About podcast.
Interesting episode today, Danny. We're talking...
Aren't they all interesting, Jason? They're all interesting as far as I can tell.
I find some of them to be absolutely horrendous.
Really? Okay, good. Me too.
No.
No.
But, it's interesting because I'm not sure... would you have a smoothie made of cricket?
Fuck yeah, in a heartbeat. I like the idea.
Yeah?
Oh yeah, when she was talking about chocolate powder. Well, because it's all, it's protein, whatever protein powder. You don't really taste the whey necessarily. It's the flavoring, right?
True.
Whatever protein powder you're using. I mean, some taste different. Like, I've tried a bunch of different kinds. And I'm curious to see how good her chocolate or vanilla cricket flour protein powder is.
Well, she says that some of them taste like pistachios, and I love pistachios.
No, she said the crickets taste like pistachios.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
And I'm glad this happens before the podcast so people can see as the podcast goes on that I am right. So without further ado, cricket flour creator, innovator, entrepreneur, the lovely Sarah Schlafly.
Sarah Schlafly, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you making the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We ask actors and writers all the time if they come from a creative family. With that in mind, do you come from a family of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I do.
Do you really? Come on.
Either my great-grandfather or my great-great-grandfather owned Mountain Valley Spring Water.
Oh,
wow.
Okay.
And he started this program where he lended money to farmers in Illinois in the spring and then got paid back on the back end in the fall. So that was kind of one of the first banking systems for farmers.
And so is your family all Midwestern born and raised?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so my ancestors immigrated from Switzerland sometime in the 1800s and landed in like Illinois, Missouri area. Yeah, that's on my dad's side. On my mom's side, I'm not quite sure what happened. The story's a little fuzzy, but they were also entrepreneurs. So my great-grandparents had a bakery in St. Louis that they ran. And then my grandpa on my mom's side was always self-employed. And then on my dad's side, too, they started Schlafly Beer, which is the largest St. Louis-based brewery here in St.
Which is saying something.
Which is no joke. Yeah.
Which is no joke in St. Louis.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be Anheuser-Busch, but once they got bought out, then it became Schlafly.
Sure. That's amazing. So did you know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur when you went to school? Did you know what you wanted to be when you went to school?
So I started wanting to be an entrepreneur when I was about 10.
Really?
Was the first time I've been told that I brought it up. And I kind of remember like watching my grandmother's work.
How old's your daughter?
She's 10. You know what's funny about her?
There you go.
She does not want to be an entrepreneur.
She already knows it. She's like, listen, There's 1,000 things you could be. This one, no, not for me.
Yeah, she like sees how hard I work. But what she doesn't realize is that I don't feel like I'm working. Like she sees me working all the time, but for me, I'm just playing.
You're engaged
and having fun.
But what a great time to be an entrepreneur as well, because if you look back at like your grandparents owning a bakery, back then it was really hard to promote a business. Now it's much easier. Obviously, there's a lot of noise out there.
Yeah.
But what you can do from your home is so different than what they could have done from
there. Oh yeah. I mean, I can do everything from my home, and really wherever I go, like I can keep my businesses running. I'm talking to people around the world constantly, 24/7.
Your daughter doesn't know how good she has it. Mom's at home working.
Yeah, she gets to bug me all day.
So at 10 years old, you kind of had the bug. You figured it out, or people told you that already it was starting to happen.
Yeah, someone told me that I had mentioned to them when I was about 10 that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. They asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. I'm like, I want to be an entrepreneur.
Most 10-year-olds don't know what an entrepreneur is.
I know. Right?
Did you
say entrepreneur?
Yeah, so it's hard to even get it out. What do you recall about putting together sort of what an entrepreneur is and how you wanted to go into that arena?
I think I just fell in love with the idea of creating something that didn't exist before.
Could have been an inventor.
Yeah.
Well, you
yeah.
kind of are in a sense.
Kind of are, yeah.
Yeah, my family's got a line of inventors too.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. It's in the blood.
Right. Yeah, I think I had because I had so many examples in my family of different types of entrepreneurs. It looked really fun to be able to create and kind of like make your own way of doing business. And I had all sorts of businesses in mind.
Did you have a lemonade stand as a kid? You had it.
Yeah, I've had a lemonade stand. I had a
You had to.
little like sewing business. I made pillows for my cousins. Um my first idea when I got the capital was going to be starting a smoothie shop. So it was very much kind of food focused. A lot of my ideas were centered around
Well,
food.
it's the ones you mentioned in terms of your family are very food and beverage focused. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, lots of food focus. And then food and farming, that's been a big part on both sides of my family. The bakery, supplying the farmers, and then the beer.
Makes sense for the Midwest. I mean, it really does. But you know what I mean? It does. It's so what do people need? What do people want? What's important to people?
Beer.
Beer tracks. And so at what point did you go, okay, I've got to start to make some decisions about what I'm going to do in my life? Did you go to school for it? And was it focused in that way or because first I want to hear about that. And then I'll ask the second question.
Yeah, I didn't think it would be smart to major in entrepreneurship in school because my school didn't have an entrepreneurship program.
Well, there's that. You know what? You can't get anything by you. It's not surprising you're a business owner. Not surprising at
all. But also, it just seemed like something you learn by doing. It's kind of one of those things you don't really have to go to school for. You can just start. And
and each business is different. So taking a course on it is not going to help you with a different type of business than maybe you started previously.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to pick a business degree. So I went for accounting so that I could really understand reading financial statements and the books and all that. I thought that would be a really good foundation for anything I did in the business world. And also if I failed at entrepreneurship, I can fall back on accounting.
When you started, kind of, what was the first business that you started? Because obviously you had a lot of ideas. So once you could begin, what did you begin with?
I started teaching cooking classes. So while I was in college, I had been cooking at that point since I was a teen. So mostly self-taught, but then in college, I worked with a bunch of chefs from really around the world at this cooking school. And so I became their, assistant. And I learned a lot of stuff that way. And then I did a lot of online research. And so I got really passionate about the intersection of cooking and nutrition and giving people the education that they needed to achieve the health goals that they wanted to achieve through food. So then I started teaching like how to prepare foods really quickly, efficiently, but also foods that's healthy, because when we're super busy, it can be challenging to eat healthy foods when you don't have any skills.
Or time, really. You're cooking for one and then you're doing dishes for one. And, sometimes you're like, I'll order in.
Yeah, exactly.
We spoke to a comedian, who has never once turned on his stove, and he only gets food delivered to his
3
house,
meals a day.
3 meals.
I know people who go out for all their meals. And to me, it because I cook so efficiently, it's actually easier for me to cook at home than to go out to eat for like breakfast and lunch for sure.
It's not easy to take kids to a restaurant all the time. I have 2 myself, so sometimes it's a big ordeal, and you're like, you know what, we'll just stay home.
You know what's hilarious is I just discovered this year for the first time that I had never been through a drive-through. Like I've never operated a drive-through because my daughter, we were heading to Six Flags. My daughter was suddenly hungry and we're about to get there, and we only had 2 hours before it closed. And in a rare moment, I didn't bring any snacks. Usually I'm prepared. So I was like, well, I guess we could go through McDonald's. So I'm like pulling up to the drive-through, and I realized I didn't really know how it worked.
Come on. How is this possible?
I
What
don't
kind of
know.
American are you?
She had to like walk me through the process, and she was laughing so hard
Because she's been with dad?
She said the grandparents took
The
her.
grandparents.
Yeah. Like I was like waiting at a window for a few minutes, and finally she's like, "Mom, this window isn't open. You got to go to the next one." I'm like, "But the sign says
Oh
like
my God, that's
pay here."
amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
So, Sarah, you mentioned your grandmother, and I know that she lived through the Great Depression, and she never went hungry because her parents owned a bakery, or your great grandparents owned the bakery, right?
Yeah.
How important, and this seems like really relevant now based on what you've already said, but how important is where you came from in order to understand where you were going, not only as a businesswoman, but just as like a person?
Well, I think it was when I heard that story growing up, I think that really impacted me. It's really inspiring to me because the things that came through my mind when I was little was, what happens if there's a big Great Depression like event in my
Lifetime?
lifetime? Thank you.
Yeah. I'm here for you.
Yeah. uh, and so that kind of terrified me because I'm like, I'm really quite food insecure. I have no way of feeding myself. I don't know how to grow anything. I'm like freaking
Sure.
out as a 10-year-old. But then also, that was when I was 10, the whole climate change debate was huge during that election. So there were all these forecasts of what climate change was going to do to our ability to produce food. And it was really concerning for me. And so I thought about that. And I thought about the Great Depression and how my grandparents lived through it. And that seemed to be one of the most impactful reasons like why I went into food, and also why I went into sustainable foods.
Well, and if you just think about your grandparents' generation, I mean, just the population of the planet was so much less then too. And
Yeah.
if that event happened now, just how many more people would be going on?
Yeah.
So, at what point did you say, okay, I'm going to, as an entrepreneur, put my focus on sustainable foods that will not only be a business but help people in the long run?
So wait, before you answer that question, were you going to be a chef? Were you like, you know what, I'll teach and then I'll be a chef and then I'll have a thing and I'm going to put entrepreneurship aside? Or was it just all funneling together?
Well, I did a little bit of chefing while I was teaching, but I really enjoyed the teaching aspect more of just making food for people. I liked people to develop that skill of being able to do it themselves. And I felt like it made a bigger impact because then they could continue to feed themselves these highly nutritious foods for the rest of their life, even when I'm not cooking for them.
So it was basically the service aspect of it, the fact that you were making a contribution to the future of their lives.
Yeah.
Sort of kept you rolling. And how did that turn into, what was the first business that you were like, this is what I'm launching, I'm getting the capital, I know how to do this, it's in my blood? What was the first thing?
So that is that cooking school was the first business. And then
Oh, right, you mentioned that. Apologies.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then the second business, I mean, I had some little side projects I was working on while before
How does one have
launched.
time for a side project? Or what does that look like? I mean, what's a side project look like? Instead of watching TV, you're launching little side projects? What are we talking about here?
Well, I was working on this TV show concept and did some filming for that.
Like a cooking show? Or just like a...
Yeah, it was a cooking show. It was going to be called Surviving on Stamps, SOS, Surviving on Stamps. And it was about people who were receiving food stamps or EBT.
Yeah.
And like kind of went through their lives. It was a reality show. They went through their lives.
Actually sounds great. And then they're teaching them how to cook and how to...
Yeah. They're like trying to eat healthier, but they feel like they can't afford it. And then we have like this cooking segment. And we have this segment where we went in their house and we filmed like what they currently had in their refrigerator and their pantry, and we went through and kind of explained.
It does feel like a vicious cycle because unfortunately the healthy food often costs more than the unhealthy food.
Yeah, that's the common notion. And I was saying, my thesis was that it doesn't. That was my thesis. But
hence why you're being someone who is focused on nutrition and food at that time is going, and even with limited resources, you can also eat healthy, and here's how, in essence.
Yeah. Because it seems like the packaged foods are cheaper. But when you really look at the type of nutrition you're getting, but also like when you take out all of the packaging and extract that and you're down to like the food itself, it's really not that much, and it doesn't last very long, and it fills you up and like temporarily, but then it's not like a lasting full feeling. So in my mind,
and who doesn't want a lasting full feeling?
So my thesis was that it's actually cheaper to eat healthy foods that aren't pre-prepared, but if you have access to it. So that, that's a big thing. A lot of people are living in areas where they don't have access, but there are still a lot of people who have access to a Walmart with like a fresh produce section. And there's a huge number of food stamps that are spent at Walmart, and it's like, I can't remember the stats because this was about a decade ago when I was working on it, but it could be anywhere from like 30 to 50%. It's a huge number.
Wow. So I want to know, when did it turn into cricket flour?
Okay, so that happened around 2016.
Next thing you know, it's cricket flour.
Yeah. I was exploring how can we find a healthier protein specifically that can be affordable to kind of this target audience I was reaching of people around the poverty line or on a tight budget. And it's good for us. It's healthy for us. It's healthy for the planet. Because protein was always the thing that I struggled with, because the plant-based proteins, I personally have just struggled with that, like being fully satisfied and feeling like I'm getting all the energy I need from it.
Also, a lot of people I know, from my wife, we've been vegetarians for various cycles in our lives, and it doesn't always sit well with her. Like, it digestively, it doesn't always do great. Like, she feels bloated and gross.
Yeah. Especially when you're pregnant, it's really hard to be plant-based.
Also, it changes. We learn more. Remember when soy was the thing?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not that long ago, soy was the thing. That was your number one alternate protein option until you started growing breasts. What?
I can't digest soy, so I get...
There you go.
Instantly bloated from it.
My mom tells the story about how when I was born and I had asthma, that as the doctor was telling her about my asthma, that he was smoking a cigarette in the room. So a lot changes over time,
Nice.
He's got the asthma. Sorry, he's got the asthma.
We have no idea where it came from, but...
What about cricket flour? So you're looking for alternative protein. You've had experience with certain plant-based, and you're like, all right, no, I'm looking for something else on a budget, in essence.
The cheap proteins on the market are like these industrialized meats. And I just was starting
Boy,
to
does
get
that sound
really...
appetizing.
I know. What is that? Is that like a lab made meat?
No, not lab made, but like just the whole industrial meat complex thing.
The infrastructure.
Yeah, it's just like this mass made meat that we all know is terrible for the animals. I mean, it's just brutal for them. It's not great for the planet, but then also it's not great for us to be...
It's not healthy, no.
Ingesting these meats that, like, at the slaughterhouse, the animals have a spike in adrenaline, anxiety, and that's being passed through our meat, so maybe our heightened sense of stress is actually like, maybe we're eating our stress,
You think it's
like,
possible that what we
possible.
eat is contributing to I'm not going to go there. Go ahead. Go on. Sorry. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, and then like the chickens, I feel like for the first time I actually had a real chicken because it came from a farm and it tasted so different than the chicken I was used to buying at the supermarket. It actually tasted like very chickeny. And supermarket chicken to me tastes
So
like,
chicken tastes like chicken? I mean, what are we doing over here? What's
I
happening?
know. And
Tasted just like chicken, but better.
Did you instantly go towards insects, or were you looking at other options at the time when you said, I'm going to find a sustainable protein?
yeah, so I was looking at I was always on the lookout for a better protein. And then I went over to Asia and I saw pretty much the bug category presented as a protein source kind of for the first time. I had seen it as a kid in like National Geographic, these like that people in strange countries eat strange foods like bugs, and that's gross.
My dad came home from Asia when I was a little kid. We lived in Italy. And he came home and he said, I ate chocolate covered crickets. They were delicious.
There you go.
This is 1975.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely like he was like the first wave of that. Very cutting edge.
It was like he was surprised. It was like a delicacy there.
What's interesting is like when you're in a new country, for some reason, because everyone else is acting like it's normal, it's just easier to like try unusual things and feel like it's normal. So I definitely did that when I traveled and like bugs were presented as normal. And so I tried some and I did some research about it and realized that it's way more sustainable. It's incredibly healthy. And if we build up the infrastructure, because there are so few inputs that are required to raise this type of protein, compared to
few
our
inputs?
conventional. So few inputs, yeah.
What do you mean by inputs?
To produce a pound of beef versus a pound of cricket protein. So we're weighing protein by protein. The beef requires 1,200 times more water and emits 100 times more carbon greenhouse gases and requires 12 times more feed.
Got it. That's what you mean. So in essence, effort and energy is what you're referencing in terms of input.
Yeah. So if you think of all those inputs it takes to produce protein for our conventional proteins, it's actually cheaper to, like, it can be cheaper to raise insects as protein source because you don't need as much land, you don't need as much water, as much feed. And what is really needed to drive down the cost so that this protein can be accessible to all, especially the target audience that I was looking for, was we need infrastructure and we need acceptance of this as a normal food source. So
it seems like the former's more easier to get than the latter.
Yeah. But it's really interesting that there are a lot of cricket farms in the world. Not as many compared to like chicken farms, but there are cricket farms around the world and they aren't really, they're super low tech, like very manual. So there's a lot of research and development that needs to be done at the farming level.
But I want to know about you. So when did you start going, okay, this is what I'm going to do flour? Did you start with flour? Did you start with, I don't know, protein steak? Cricket steak? What did you do? How did you start going, I want to bring this to the United States and I want this to be a thing?
So I knew that Americans just weren't going to eat whole bugs. That was not happening. I didn't even want to eat a whole bug. Like, it's kind of, even though I am accustomed to looking at lobster on a plate, I'm not accustomed to looking at bugs on the plate. And it's pretty much the same thing, only lobsters are bigger.
Other than an escargot? Do you call an escargot a bug?
It's very similar to a bug.
That's what I'm saying. I got no problem with an escargot.
Yeah.
Little garlic and butter? No, go on. Sorry.
We're used to like seeing lobster, and it's actually, if you think about it, it's kind of scarier than a cricket because it's much bigger. You got these bulging eyes looking at you.
If I remember correctly, lobsters were originally used to feed the slave population because people wouldn't eat them originally. And then somebody was like, oh, well, these are pretty tasty. We'll charge $30 a pound for these.
Yeah. So the way lobster like grew to fame was when people started moving inland into the country, like into the Midwest, they started serving them on the trains as like this exotic East Coast food, but they served the meat. They didn't like plate the whole
Mhm.
lobster. And so people were just tasting the meat and they're like, oh, this is delicious. So it had a little bit of a marketing spin on it. And I thought, well, that's a way that a lot of foods that were originally thought of as gross, like sushi, grew to be appetizing, was because the sushi itself was manipulated, the lobster was manipulated. And so if we just manipulate cricket and make it not look like a cricket, you just grind it into a powder and then blend it into other things and just disguise it, then it's really actually easy to eat.
But there are, in my research, more than 2,400 species of crickets. How did you like focus in on which species or multiple species you would use in your company, in your business?
So in other countries, they're very accustomed to eating crickets. And so when I looked at these other countries, they claimed that the Echetta domesticus species was the most delicious from a culinary standpoint.
Ah,
So I
okay.
leaned on this
Experience,
wisdom.
people's experience.
Yeah, wisdom from other countries to really
Sure.
dictate which species to use.
And just how sustainable are crickets in terms of like reproduction? How quickly do they reproduce and how many offspring do they produce enough to keep things moving
Yeah.
forward?
One female cricket will lay about 100 eggs. So pretty pretty great reproduction from that standpoint. And you can
Multiple times a year? Is it
yeah,
something
yeah.
that they? Mm.
They'll lay that multiple times a year. And crickets will grow from the egg stage to an adult in about 6 weeks. You can get that.
Oh, that's pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can
Whereas
scale up a
cattle
farm.
takes years, right? In terms of like if you're looking at other proteins that we're more familiar
Yeah, I mean the other industries have really like gotten that cycle further compressed due to like growth hormones and steroids and stuff like that. But on the other hand, it's like, do we really want to be putting that in our meat?
So, Sarah, you figured out that maybe if I grind these down, make them into a flour, and start making things, it'll be easier to sort of reframe what you're eating. And so, what were the things that you started with that you were like, these are friggin' good? This is good. And is the cricket element any different than I don't taste almonds when I'm using almond flour? Is it the same
Yeah.
idea? Yeah.
Yeah, it is the same. Now, when you're so I've tasted crickets from around the world. And there are some really great tasting crickets and there's some really bad tasting crickets. And it all depends on what the farmers feed the crickets.
Can I ask you a silly question, Sarah, to interrupt you? So when you're talking about the taste of a cricket, like is there meat inside the exoskeleton? Like or is it the exoskeleton that you're mostly tasting?
You're mostly tasting their meat, I suppose,
Yeah.
is
Okay.
what really the exoskeleton across the crickets, I think for the most part tastes the same. But it's kind of their muscles that really have a different flavor profile depending on what is fed. So I've tasted a cricket that tasted exactly like a pistachio.
Oh,
And I've
wow.
had crickets where I had to just like run to the sink and spit it out because it
Sure.
tasted so bad.
Do those pistachio crickets, do they have that one that is always like the one funky pistachio? You know what I'm talking about? There's always that one in the bag.
Yeah,
and
it's a
you're like,
little
"What is
bitter.
that?"
Yeah, it's all of
Yeah.
a sudden a little bitter. Sure. I know
It's
I know
kinda
what you're
like extra
referencing.
shriveled. Yeah, I know what you
Yeah.
mean too. Yeah. Um, yeah, so it's been really interesting exploring that. And then I thought, what are some ways that we can alter this feed to produce like a really amazing flavor profile? So that's one of the research and development concepts that we're working on right now, really getting into the food science of this. And then the additional layer on top of that is okay, so um, between 30 and 40% of all US food ends up in our landfills, which when you measure that, the carbon and greenhouse gas emissions that were used to produce that food that ended up in the landfills, it is more than the whole airline industry. So we have all of this food waste going in our landfills, which is really great nutrition that isn't going back into the soil. It's going in our landfills and cannot be reclaimed and used.
But crickets can eat it, is where you're going with
Yeah,
this, right?
exactly. So we are running experiments in St. Louis where we're going to the food manufacturers and they're giving us their waste, which, one food manufacturer can produce 1,000 pounds of waste a week easily. So we take that waste and feed it to the crickets. So our crickets have had.
This is not the way the conversation was supposed to go. I don't want to talk about the crickets eating the waste. I want to talk about the low carb burgers that I can make with cricket flour so that I don't have to worry about eating my carbs. That's the conversation I wanted to have.
Are they low in carbs?
Oh, yeah. Super low.
Well, it's a protein.
So here's a question off of that and then off of what I saw on your website, which is you sell it at a 16-ounce bag. How many crickets does it take to create that 16-ounce bag?
4,000.
Wow, that was quick. She came back quickly with that.
I know.
About 4,000 crickets for a 16-ounce bag.
So every gram of crickets is about 10. Every gram of cricket powder is about 10 crickets.
So what's your favorite thing to make with the cricket flour? I mean, I guess you make anything that requires flour, right? I mean,
I like cricket chow.
What is cricket chow?
So cricket chow is puppy chow or Muddy Buddies using cricket protein. So I take the Chex Mix, I coat it in a nut butter, usually peanut butter. And then I take our chocolate protein powder and coat that. And I give it to my daughter. She loves it.
I was just going to ask. We need to know what the 10-year-old thinks of cricket.
I was going to say like chocolate protein powder. So you make smoothies out of the cricket flour as your protein powder. That's fantastic.
Yeah, you can do smoothies. You can bake it into breads.
Can you bread your chicken? Can you bread your chicken with the cricket flour? I mean, then you're killing it.
I've had someone do that. I'm like, why are you just like adding protein to protein?
Well, because the flavor of breading, or even like a sole fillet, right? You want to lightly batter a sole fillet. If you did it in cricket flour, it's all protein all the time. It's fantastic, no? You're looking at me like I'm crazy. By the way, for people that can't see, looking at me like I got two heads.
Because why wouldn't you just bread your crickets with cricket flour? That's what I think
No, the whole point of it is flour. It can be used as any kind of flour, right? And it's great because it's not flour.
But it's also it's to be more sustainable, and chicken is right. I mean, that's the idea, is right to replace the chicken.
I want to be able to do what I want with my cricket flour. I want it in smoothies. Yeah. I want to bread my sole fillets. What else? I want to make muffins. I want to make cricket flour muffins.
I don't recommend swapping
baking?
like 100% of your flour with cricket flour, but swapping 20% works really well.
Let me ask you this, Sarah. When we talked capital earlier, when you're setting up a business that is bringing a sustainable protein that isn't as familiar to Western world, was it difficult to find the capital for something like this?
So not really, because this type of business didn't take a whole lot to get started. It's I started it really, really small scale just to test. Well, first of all, I didn't even think it was going to work. I didn't think I'd be able to get anyone to eat crickets, but I just started talking about the concept at some networking events. And as I continued to go to the networking events, I had random people come up to me and be like, "Hey, are you that person?
You're the cricket lady
like, doing a cricket business?" I'm like, "Who are you?" And like, just word of mouth, it naturally was being shared around. And that's actually what made me think, actually, this could be a business, was because because it's so memorable and naturally viral, people were just sharing the concept with their friends. And I was like, wow, I can really leverage that so that I don't have to put in, a whole lot of capital to really get started, at least. And so I I went like a very bare bones method of launching it. I bought some resealable heat seal bags on Amazon. And from my own little kitchen, I started mixing around different recipes.
But that's the greatest
And
story. That's the American entrepreneur story, right?
right,
That's
exactly.
IBM, that's Apple.
Yeah. So then I went to the farmer's market and I started just like selling it at my local farmer's market to basically collect consumer research and get feedback. And so I also designed my own sticker label and just slapped it on the front. And I called it Mighty Cricket, and I found a stock
It's
image of a cricket.
stuck.
It did
Yeah,
stick,
literally
yeah.
like a sticker.
Yeah. And actually, since then, I've been like several times thinking about changing my company name, and people always told me, no, I like Mighty Cricket, keep it. And I'm like, okay. Um, so the feedback I was getting was like I would have different talking points, and I would see what talking point it was that converted someone into a customer, and like I could make a sale from. And that dictated what
And
I
what
put in
was
my
that, by the
packaging.
way?
Well, what I realized is no one gives a shit about sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
That is not going to get a customer. They want nutrition. They want to know, what does this do for me? I don't care about the plan. The plan is just a bonus. That's just like brand
It's a feel
loyalty.
good. It's a
Yeah.
feel good. Yeah. Yeah.
That just like makes me keep feeling good about continuing to spend money. But
Mm-hmm.
really what I know is, what does this do for me? And of course, number one is taste. There are some people who like don't care about taste. It's all about nutrition, but that population's fairly niche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are the people who are choking down like spirulina and bee pollen because they know it's good for them.
Sarah, I got to ask a question about the farms themselves and just how loud they are. If it takes 4,000 to create a 16-ounce bag, how many are in a farm at any given time, and how loud is it?
Oh, you can have millions at any given time, depending on how big your farm is. But there's a couple
Do you
farms
need
in Canada.
earphones when you
So
walk in there?
when you go inside the cricket, well, first of all, only 50% of your crickets are chirping because only the males chirp. They're attracting the women or the females.
And that's a big club they're in, a big nightclub.
Yeah.
1,000,000 crickets.
And they're only chirping when they're ready to reproduce.
Oh, okay.
So there's this very specific window. So when you think about it, only like a fraction of your farm is chirping. But when they like see a human approaching, they all get quiet because they're kind of trying to
Interesting.
hide.
Yeah.
So it's really not that loud.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
You wouldn't think. All right, so we have a listener question here I want to ask you. I think we touched a little bit on it, but Chef K goes by Chef K. What can't cricket flour do? Is there anything that you can make with standard flour that doesn't really work using cricket flour?
Yeah, so cricket flour doesn't have those gluten properties. It's 70% protein. So when you're thinking about how it if you're baking with it, you have to think about your protein percentage and how much you can add without like really throwing off the texture of, say, a pizza crust or something like that. You only swap a percentage with the regular flour in baking applications. But what flour can't do that cricket flour can do is add that protein boost in like sauces and smoothies. Whereas you wouldn't like throw regular flour into a smoothie or like even hummus.
That hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes like you can like sprinkle it on top of guacamole. In Mexico, they use crickets as a topping. So that's really common. Or they'll like line rims of glasses with salt and powdered cricket. And that becomes a drink
Get
mix.
a little protein in your drink.
I don't know why they do it.
Work.
They just like it's like part of their drinks. Yeah.
I gotta say, when she started talking about, it being sustainable and all that, I really like that. I mean, obviously there's a consciousness that is required more and more because things are going south. But that being said, I didn't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear crickets eating
Waste.
waste. You know what I mean? Like, I just was like, I'm not doing it.
At least they're not eating our waste, though. That would be different.
I mean, JB, look, if I want to really try this stuff, I want it to be a part of my life because it sounds like a great idea. And if it tastes really good, I haven't tried it yet. Hint, hint, Sarah. But when I do, I want it to be a part of my life and I want to enjoy it. And I want to think of it as, again, I want to get used to the idea and not even think about crickets. I don't think about almonds. When I drink almond milk, I'm not going, almonds. I don't want to think about crickets. But I do think about escargot and lobster a lot these days.
See, I prefer crab over lobster. I think lobster is a little too chewy.
What kind of New Englander are you, bro?
No. Alaskan king crab leg is just...
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, Alaskan king crab leg.
You don't even need to put butter on it. It's just so sweet already. But anyway, I digress. One of my new experiences that I want to experience is walking into a cricket farm with 1 million crickets and them all going silent and then having my ego just be shattered like, oh my God, they're all talking about me. Why aren't they saying anything?
I like it. I know. I thought it'd be like a loud thing,
Yeah.
but apparently I'm uninformed as in terms of crickets.
As always, it's only the horny ones making the noise. That's what
really. That's. And on that note, thank you for listening and enjoy your cricket flower.
Music by Denny Nucci. Produced and edited by the same two people you heard hosting this show because they have no friends.